Today I'm down in Southern California taking a look at the 2022 Mazda MX-30. This is Mazda's full electric vehicle in the US, and supposedly next year we're also going to get a plug-in hybrid version of the MX-30. And as we take a look deeper into the vehicle, you can definitely see that this vehicle was designed for that plug-in hybrid mission. I'll touch on this a little bit more at the end of the video, but at this point I should say that the MX-30 has just 100 miles of range. And personally, I don't think that's too much of a problem. Clearly, if you need more than 100 miles of range, this electric vehicle is not the right one for you. But if everybody out there believes in an electric future, if you think that America should move towards green vehicles like battery electrics, hydrogen vehicles, etc., in order to reduce emissions, improve energy independence, etc., then America needs a wide variety of different electric vehicles. Not everybody wants, needs, or can afford a big battery EV or a big battery pickup truck. Some folks out there are simply looking for an efficient, inexpensive commuter car with the features that they're expecting and a little bit of fun to drive tossed onto the top. And that's exactly where the MX-30 comes in. Electric vehicles with shorter ranges like the MX-30 make the most sense in suburban and urban areas where charging infrastructure is ubiquitous. And that's why the MX-30 is only going to be sold in California to begin with. There is going to be again that plug-in hybrid MX-30 that's coming supposedly next year that's probably going to be sold outside of California. So if you want one of these outside of California, you might need to wait just a little bit. We have full LED steering headlights up front, LED turn signals down below, and a modification of the design philosophy that we've seen on Mazdas for a while. Electric vehicles don't need nearly as much cooling as you find in a regular gasoline vehicle, but remember, this is going to be available as a plug-in hybrid as well. And that's why we see a few more openings here than we find in some EVs. This section of the grille is functional up top and functional down below. And to help improve aerodynamic efficiency, we do find active grille shutters up front. In talking with EV fans, the other controversial aspect of the MX-30 has been its price tag. This is going to start at $33,470. So that is notably more expensive than some of the other entry-level EVs in America. But remember that the MX-30 does come with the full $7,500 tax credit plus additional state and local incentives in California. It also comes with a ton of standard feature content. And that's what really separates this from something like the Nissan Leaf. This is a much more premium EV on the inside. And in that respect, the only direct competitor to this in my mind is probably going to be the mini electric vehicle, although this is a little bit bigger and more comfortable. We get features like standard rain sense wipers, a 120-volt inverter, a leather steering wheel. We get the steering headlights, a heads-up display standard, moonroof is standard, the 7-inch LCD cluster, 8.5-inch infotainment system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, lane keeping assistance, blind spot monitoring, adaptive cruise control, and power seats with memory. All of that is standard on every MX-30. That price tag also buys you the most uniquely styled Mazda available in America. Most of the models I was looking at today sport a 3-color scheme. So we have this gray stripe right here, the black sections at the bottom, and a black roof, and then of course the body color of your choice. We have taillamp modules that really stick out pretty far from the body, definitely sort of rugged crossover looking style, even though this is available only as a front-wheel drive vehicle. The battery pack is a skateboard style battery pack underneath the vehicle with enough room for an auxiliary gas tank in the rear, because this will be available as a plug-in hybrid vehicle also. According to Mazda, this is related to the CX-30. It's 173.3 inches long, making this almost exactly the same size as a Jeep Compass or a Toyota Corolla hatch. But unlike the CX-30, it has suicide doors in the rear on both sides. That does make getting into the back seat a little bit easier if you're in a parking area where you can actually use those suicide rear doors. I have to say that for an urban or a suburban vehicle, this is a little bit tricky because in some of those tighter parking areas, you don't really have enough room to sort of get in over here with that car parked next to you and then try and get in this door here, and then try and squeeze in the back without these doors bopping into one another. But fortunately, there are rubber pads all around the doors, so that way they won't damage one another if you do accidentally knock them into each other. The rear of the MX-30 picks up some of the styling elements from the front, like these round tail lamp modules and the silver stripe that intersects with the hatch. The backup light is right there on the hatch itself. The first thing you'll notice under the hood of the MX-30 is how much empty space there is. The motor is on this side of the engine bay because there's supposed to be an engine over there on that side of the engine bay if you get the plug-in hybrid model. This electric motor is good for 143 horsepower peak and 200 pound-feet of torque. But as we'll talk about later in the drive section, there is a limit to how long it can deliver 143 horsepower. The onboard battery pack is a liquid-cooled lithium-ion pack in a skateboard formation under the body of the vehicle, and it's rated for 35.5 kilowatt-hours nominal. They haven't really said what the usable capacity is, but I suspect it's right around 30 kilowatts. When we get the plug-in hybrid version of the MX-30, it is going to be a serial plug-in hybrid. So even though there is a big aluminum mount over there on that side for where the engine is going to bolt to the electric motor unit, they're not going to be mechanically connected according to Mazda. It's going to be a pure serial hybrid setup. Mazda has not released any details on the plug-in hybrid version of the MX-30, but they have been calling it a range extender, and that is important to keep in mind. I suspect this is going to qualify as a range-extending EV according to California's rules. And that's a very important classification. It would be classified the same way that the BMW i3 range extender was. That would mean that the electric range has to be greater than or equal to the gasoline range in the vehicle. So if and when this comes with a range extender on board, it's going to have about 100 miles of EV range and 100 miles of gasoline range. That's going to be my estimate, at least for the moment, until we get official details from Mazda. Now, it's always possible they could call it and classify it as a plug-in hybrid and then give it a lot more gasoline range, but then they wouldn't get all the same kind of ZEV credits that you could get in California if they limited it to just 100 miles. So if Mazda does come out and end up limiting it to 100 miles, that's why they did it. And that's why BMW did that with the i3 range extender as well. Now let's talk about charging. It happens right back here behind this very large charge door. We have a J1772 2-charge connector and a CCS DC fast charge connector. There's an onboard 7.2 kilowatt charger that will take the battery from 20% to 80% in 2 hours and 50 minutes if you have access to an EVSE that will deliver 7.2 kW. If you only have access to a level 1 charger, it could take up to 15.5 hours to get this vehicle from 20% to 80%, and you could do that with a DC fast charger in 36 minutes. That's not terribly swift because the battery is relatively small. And remember, the amount of power you can pull out of a battery or push into a battery is directly related to its size in the number of cells. Theoretically, for that 36 minutes of charging, this should give you about 60 miles of EV range because the vehicle itself is only going to give you 100 from completely full to completely empty. So far, I've spent about 6 hours in the MX-30, and I found the front seats to be quite comfortable. I'm going to give the driver's seat 9 out of 10 points, but I'm going to have to give the front seat score 8 out of 10 points because the passenger seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. It's a manual design, and the passenger gets a multi-way power driver's seat with a tiltable seat bottom cushion, 2-way adjustable lumbar support, and standard 2-position memory over there on the dash. The steering column is a tilt telescopic design with a large range of motion. One other interesting touch, the front door is open to almost 90 degrees, so if you have a lot of area in wherever parking lot you're going to be parking your MX-30, that could make getting in and out a little bit easier. And it's also going to make the rear door do-si-do a little bit easier. The rear doors don't open quite as far, and as you can see, you need to enter in this little zone here to get into the back of the MX-30. 2 buttons I did not expect to see on the back of the driver's seat are these power buttons here, so that way you can tilt the seat forward or move it forward and backward if you're in the back seat. If you frequently have kids in the back seat or you frequently carry annoying passengers, one thing about these buttons that I did not expect to find is that they still work when the vehicle is in motion, the driver is seat belted into place, vehicle is in drive, etc. Someone back here can still be pushing your buttons. I'm not sure if that's a flaw in this pre-production unit and if that will be solved by the time the MX-30 is in final production, but it's certainly something to keep in mind if it doesn't get fixed. Now, back here we have a rear seat area that reminds me an awful lot of the BMW i3. Decent amount of headroom, although in the middle seat position my head does touch the ceiling. It's a 5-seat vehicle, so there are 5 seat belts. Latch anchors in the outboard sitting positions with top tether anchors back there as well. But keep in mind, this is a subcompact vehicle and it has a fairly long hood because this is designed for that rotary range extender to live up front. If this front seat's all the way back in its tracks, my knees are just barely touching the seat back, and back here, my head just barely touches the ceiling as well. Rear passengers get a softly padded center armrest made out of the same fabric as the middle of the seats. We have 2 cup holders there, another armrest over there on the side. It's a fairly small one just in your elbow area. And then you'll notice that there are no door handles on the inside for the rear doors. So if you want to get out of the rear, someone from the front is going to have to help you. Behind the manual hatch, a power hatch does not appear to be available. We find 21 cubic feet of cargo capacity. I suspect 4 24-inch roller bags should fit back here. This is right in line with most subcompact crossovers. The rear seats fold flat with the cargo area, but under the load floor we don't find much additional storage space. There's some foam dividers here with some small cubbies. You can put some small knickknacks there. We have the tire inflator and can of fix-a-flat there. This last section does lift out. You can see this is where we find the Bose subwoofer for the optional Bose audio system right there in a small amount of area, but this other foam divider doesn't come out. And that's because the cargo area is where Mazda has stashed the 7.2 kilowatt onboard charger. Unlike my usual disclaimer, this time as we look around the interior, keep in mind that the vast majority of what you're going to see is actually standard on the MX-30, like this moonroof. Over the last few years, Mazda has been working hard to be seen not just as a Honda and Toyota competitor, but also as a value alternative to something like Acura. And I think that really shows in the materials quality and the materials choices on this inside, as well as the industrial design. This is a very attractive interior. I love the fact that they've combined fabric with imitation leather, and all the components in here are either recycled, recyclable, environmentally friendly, or renewable. This is the lighter of the interior color options available. You can see it's sort of a gray herringbone fabric there with some brown piping, brown stitching right there in the middle. And then we get similar colors going over here on the doors. Lots of, again, recycled materials, soft touch inserts there in the middle of the door and on the upper section of the door. And that little tan section you can see right there on the hand grip, that's actually cork. Cork is, of course, a renewable resource, but the other reason we find it in here is because Mazda actually started out as a cork processing company, believe it or not. The general design of this interior is familiar as a Mazda, but it's not a direct copy of the Mazda 3 or the CX-30. In the middle of the dashboard, however, we do have the same infotainment software. This supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and like the rest of the Mazda lineup, it's not a touchscreen. Instead, it uses the Mazda rotary controller right here in the center console. Aside from the addition of the EV settings menu, the rest of the software in the infotainment system is basically the same as the CX-30 and the Mazda 3. Below that, we have two large air vents, start-stop button there for the vehicle, so no just hop in and drive. Down here we have touch controls and physical buttons for the climate control system. I expect this to work its way into other Mazda vehicles going forward. There's an auto button there, and then you can actually touch the screen here if you wanted to, or you can use this temperature slider here. This is a single zone automatic climate control system in the vehicle. The shifter is somewhat unusual. Right now we're in park. There's an unlock button there on the side, then we push it over and then pull down for drive. So if you want to park it, you don't just go forward. That's reverse. You have to knock it over to the side for park. Behind the shifter, we have the controller I showed you earlier, the electric parking brake, auto brake hold, controls for the infotainment system, and then a large floating center console design. You can see if I zoom in right there, we have a USB input for the infotainment system. There's also an AC inverter port that is standard. This tray is also lined in cork. You can see I have my connected smartphone right there. Cork accents running right there around that center console. And then under this area, these flip up so that we can access two large cup holders. And then right here, we have a storage area just behind, and then a padded lid. On the driver's side, we find a standard partial LCD instrument cluster, about a 7-inch display in the middle, physical gauge for charge and power over here, as well as the battery level and battery temperature. Just above that, we have a standard heads-up display that's projected on the glass. The steering wheel is the exact same design as we find in other modern Mazda models, including leather wrapping, a sport grip up top, and paddles on the back of the steering wheel, down over here on the left, and up over here on the right. These are regen braking paddles. If we toggle this one on the right side all the way up, this gives us essentially no regen braking. If we pull this one back here 5 times, it's going to give us the most aggressive regen. There's a little display right here in the LCD instrument cluster right there to the other side of the drive logo. You'll see it looks like an upside down Christmas tree. That's the most aggressive regen. If I click it over here, this is the least aggressive regen. The sections hollow out and then disappear when the vehicle is in its regular mode. On the left side of the wheel, we also find infotainment buttons, an info button there, phone hang up and pickup buttons, and on the right side we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control system. Now let's get the MX-30 out on the road. You'll notice that it takes a little bit of time for the power to ramp all the way up. Till we're about 35 miles per hour or so, we don't get 100% of the motor's output. That's because Mazda doesn't want the front wheels to spin. And with 200 pound-feet of torque and 215 with tires, this could definitely do a lot of front wheel spinning if they didn't manage that torque at lower speeds. I suspect that this vehicle should go 0 to 60 around 8.5 seconds. One really interesting twist with the MX-30 is that this is not terribly heavy for a modern EV. This weighs just over 3,600 pounds. That means this is just about as heavy, really, as an MX-30 Turbo with an extra passenger in it. If you look closely at the spec sheet of the MX-30, you'll notice that it gives 2 different power output figures. It has a power output figure and then a peak power figure. So peak is 143 horsepower. Regular is approximately 105 to 110 horsepower, somewhere in that range. How much oomph you get out of the motor and the battery will depend on the state of charge of the battery, how fast you're going, and exactly what you're doing with the vehicle. So 0 to 60, for instance, getting on the freeway, that is going to give you the full power. But if you're on a long uphill climb on, say, a mountain pass, and you have the accelerator pedal all the way to the floor, there's going to be a moment where you don't get 143 horsepower anymore, and you will notice the power gauge start to drop down. That's because you're no longer in that peak section. This likely has something to do with the size of the battery pack, the number of cells, and or possibly cooling the pack, but I would bet it's probably just pack size. I don't have any 60 to 0 stopping distances just yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was really close to the CX-30, because the most interesting thing about the MX-30 is how light it is. This weighs about 3,600 pounds or so. It's approximately 100 to 150 pounds heavier than a CX-30. That's not a great deal, and that is significantly lighter than other modern EVs for 2022. The big reason for that is the battery size. Smaller battery means a lot less weight, and that means better handling, better driving dynamics, and just better feel out on the road. road. This doesn't have that same sort of firm and bouncy feel that we find in modern Teslas or the Ford Mustang Mach-E or a lot of other big battery EVs that are tuned towards the sportier side of things. In bigger and heavier EVs that are tuned for sportier driving, there's just not enough motion in the suspension to be able to damp the curb weight of the vehicle over especially larger bumps in the road. But in a vehicle like this, there is enough room in order to do that, so you will certainly notice that out on the road. And even though we have 215 with tires, I actually think this feels a little bit more fun than the CX-30. According to Mazda, the center of gravity is notably lower because the battery pack is, of course, a skateboard-style pack. And in addition to that, the structure of the body is stiffer. Although obviously this is related to the CX-30, Mazda didn't simply dump an electric motor and a battery pack into the CX-30. They chose to change the structure of the vehicle, and that makes this more rigid. They changed the way everything is mounted under the hood because we don't have an engine under there, we have an electric motor, and that meant that they could do things differently and improve the dynamics of the vehicle at the same time as they electrified it. I'm really excited to see what Mazda's electric future looks like because this is definitely fun to drive when the road starts winding. This has the same sort of Mazda steering feel that we find in their gasoline electric vehicles with the more instant thrust available from the electric motor. So even though the horsepower total doesn't seem too exciting, when the road is winding like this actually is a little bit more fun than some of Mazda's turbo models because the power comes on instantly, it turns off instantly, and they can play tricks with the regenerative braking system around corners to help give you a little bit more grip around some of these tighter corners. And I love the way that Mazda has handled regenerative braking. This does not have a one-pedal drive mode. If you're looking for that, you need to shop elsewhere. But it does allow you to adjust the regen, the throttle lift-off regen, in 5 different levels. We can get essentially 0. It's a little bit less than 0. It's a tiny bit of regen going on there. Or we can dial it up and up and up until we get max regen. Now, because of the size of the battery pack and the size of the electric motor, max regen is not as aggressive as you'll see in some EVs, but it's still pretty decent. Obviously, I haven't had this at home to run through my usual battery of tests, but I suspect that cabin noise is going to be pretty similar to the CX-30. The big battery pack that's right underneath me helps insulate the cabin a little bit from some road noise, but we do get a little bit of wind noise right around the door joint there between the front door and the back door. It's a little bit difficult to talk about fuel economy because I have been driving this mainly out on fun winding mountain roads like the one that I'm on here, so I've been averaging 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour. According to the EPA, this should get 95 mpge, so it should be a little bit better than that in daily driving. If you're willing to give the MX-30 a chance, this is definitely going to be a fun addition to your daily commute. And I love the fact, again, that Mazda has tossed so much standard equipment onto this vehicle, especially the leather steering wheel. That definitely makes this feel better when you're out in your favorite winding mountain road. It really enhances the driver experience. The lightweight nature of the MX-30 is definitely fun. And the fact that they've given us things like the heads-up display, the LCD partial cluster there, the big infotainment system all standard, those are all really great touches. If you want to get your hands on a Mazda MX-30, reach out to your Mazda dealer today because these should be on sale very soon. And again, they're going to start at $33,470. If you want all of the options, that'll set you back $36,480. There's not too much difference between the bottom end and the top end trim because the base model comes with so much standard equipment already. The Premium Plus package will give you 18-inch wheels, the front cross-traffic detection, 360-degree camera, Bose audio, XM radio, a heated steering wheel, auto-dimming mirrors, and front and rear parking sensors. Definitely a handy feature if you live in an urban or a suburban area. Because this is Mazda's first vehicle available in the United States with the plug, it still qualifies for the full $7,500 federal tax credit and additional state and local incentives. Also keep in mind that you can drive in the carpool lane in California with this EV, just like every other EV and hydrogen car out there. Mazda has yet to release any lease pricing on the MX-30, but don't be surprised if this ends up being one of the least expensive Mazda vehicles in America to lease. Now it's time for some unvarnished thoughts on the MX-30 and small battery EVs generally. I actually owned an EV with 100 miles of range back in 2016, so I am well aware of the limitations for a vehicle like this. That particular model was a Kia Soul EV, and its usable battery capacity was really not too far off where we see this MX-30. For the vast majority of the time, I was just fine. I had a 60-mile one-way commute. I was able to take it to the office because I was able to charge there, and then I was able to drive it home and then charge at home. Even if your daily driving needs are significantly larger than the average American's daily driving needs, which are right around 30 miles a day, it is possible to integrate an MX-30 into your life if you want to. Now, obviously, if you don't want to, and you want 200 miles or 300 miles of electric-only range, then clearly this is not the EV for you. There are plenty of other EVs out there to choose from, but they will generally speaking cost more, and they're not going to be quite as good of a value as the MX-30. I was really surprised to see all the standard feature content in the MX-30. I admit that when I first saw this and I saw 100 miles of of range and an over $33,000 starting price, I thought, gee, that's a little expensive for what you get. But when you actually take a look at the stuff that you get, it makes a bit more sense. Now, would this be more exciting with, say, 200 miles of range? Yes, absolutely. But is this also strangely rational and pragmatic? Oddly, yes, because the battery pack in here at 35 approximately kilowatt hours of size is only a little bit more than 1/3 the size of the battery in my Mustang Mach-E. So in a totally rational and pragmatic world where we're thinking altruistically and holistically about battery electric vehicle production in the world, where batteries are a limited quantity, this makes a lot of sense because you could build 3 of these for the size battery pack that you find in that long-range Mach-E. And this is a tiny fraction of the battery pack that we're going to see in bigger EVs out there, like the upcoming long-range Rivian pickup truck, the long-range Ford Lightning pickup truck, the Hummer, etc. All of those have really, really huge batteries, and this is considerably smaller, so it uses fewer worldwide resources. It makes a little bit more sense. And if you want the addition of an electric range extender, you can get that supposedly coming next year. We'll see when that actually arrives, but it's going to have a rotary engine under the hood and a generator, and that's going to help give this extended range for those longer road trips. So if you're looking at the MX-30 and you say, well, I really need more than 100 miles of range, but I like the look, then you might want to stay tuned because that model's coming soon. The problem for small battery EVs like the MX-30 is that car buying is rarely a rational and pragmatic process. People buy pickup trucks because they might go to Home Depot once a year. They buy a big 3-row crossover because, well, maybe the kids are going to come home from college one day and bring a friend with them, so we might need that 3rd row. People rarely seem to buy a car for their average use case like this, and then rent a car for those occasional use cases where you actually need to exceed whatever your vehicle can do that you have in your driveway, whether that's carrying more people, going further, going off-road, or towing something. Mazda is really attempting to make a rational argument with the MX-30. We'll see if it falls on deaf ears, but to help soften the blow a little bit, for 3 years you will get 10 days in a Mazda vehicle that is gasoline powered with the purchase of your MX-30. So if you need a CX-9 or a CX-5 or whatever is available in that program, we'll hear more details about that coming up, you'll be able to get one for 30 days total over a 3-year period with your MX-30. If that still doesn't sound like a good fit for you, don't worry, there are other EVs out there to choose from, and Mazda will have other electrified vehicles in North America over the next few years. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comments section below. And again, remember, if you really believe in an electric future for America, then it's going to take a wide variety of electric vehicles in order to fit all the various categories of vehicles we have in the US. It's not just going to be performance luxury vehicles. We're going to need larger 3-row vehicles, pickup trucks, vans, SUVs. We're going to need smaller cars, affordable cars, compact cars, cars for urban environments, etc. And that's why, as much as I would love to see the MX-30 with, say, 150 or 170 miles of range, I'm not necessarily disappointed with the range that we ended up getting, as long as you keep in mind who the MX-30 is designed for. I'll see all of you later.